They say the Templars were born in the fire of the Crusades, but that's only part of the truth. In the shadows of Jerusalem, inside the ruins of Solomon's temple, a secret order awakened. What they discovered beneath those stones rewrote their purpose, reshaped their mission, and forged a legacy that still echoes through time. This wasn't just the birth of a military order, it was the resurrection of a forgotten covenant, a truth too dangerous to survive in the light. When the first knights arrived in the early 12th century, they were not tasked with building fortresses or battling infidels. Instead, they vanished beneath the Temple Mount, where once stood the great Temple of Solomon. There, out of sight and beyond the records of kings and clerics, they began a 9-year excavation in the shadow of the past. What they found was not merely treasure. It was something older than Christianity, something sealed beneath centuries of dust and holy lies. Whispers say they uncovered ancient scrolls, secret chambers, and symbols etched into the rock that defied the teachings of Rome. And as the knights emerged, they were no longer simple warriors. Their silence was heavier, their purpose changed. They began to speak in codes and build with knowledge they should not have possessed. They had found something under the temple that shifted the foundation of their mission. This was not about faith. This was about guarding a secret, one tied not to the Vatican, but to Solomon himself. In the stone corridors beneath Jerusalem, the real order of the temple was born, not as defenders of pilgrims, but as keepers of something the world was never meant to see. If you're captivated by these hidden chapters of Templar history, you can hit the like button and subscribe now. Join us as we uncover the forbidden secrets and suppressed legends the history books dared not tell. Your support fuels the mission to bring ancient mysteries back into the light. In the year 1219, when most imagined the newly formed Knights Templar patrolling dusty roads and shielding trembling pilgrims from bandits, 9 men vanished beneath Jerusalem. These were not nameless soldiers. They were the founders of the order, led by Hugues de Payens, hand-picked and bound by oaths too ancient to be written. For 9 full years, they withdrew from the world above, descending daily into the labyrinth beneath the Temple Mount, returning only to sleep and speak in hushed tones. No records tell of battles fought or roads cleared during this time, and even the chroniclers of the Crusades found their silence unusual. It was as if their true mission lay not in defending the faithful, but in unearthing something buried beneath centuries of stone and scripture. The church remained quiet, offering no explanation, while whispers in Jerusalem's bazaars told of strange tools carried into the ruins, of scrolls wrapped in velvet, and of foreign symbols inked onto parchment no priest would dare to bless. What could these knights have found to merit such secrecy? Some claim they unearthed fragments of Solomon's own writings, texts older than the Gospels, guarded by those who once called themselves the Watchers. Others speak of a vault, sealed in ancient times by masons whose names were forgotten before the first crusader lifted a sword. Whatever the truth, when the 9 knights finally re-emerged, they were changed. Their eyes carried the weight of something witnessed, something too vast and too dangerous to ever be spoken aloud. They returned not as warriors, but as the keepers of a silence that reshaped the very core of the order. Within a generation, the Templars would rise to unimaginable power, blessed by popes and feared by kings, yet the root of that rise lay not in battle or blessing, but in those 9 missing years, hidden beneath the broken stones of a forgotten temple. Those who watched closely would notice that from this moment onward, the Templars were no longer simply soldiers of Christ. They were something else, something older, reborn in the shadows of Jerusalem. Beneath the blistering sun of the holy city, under layers of dust and sacred stone, the Templars dug not with fanfare but in silence. Far from the eyes of crusader lords and curious monks, their so-called residents, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, once stood atop the ruins of Solomon's Temple, and it was here, in the shadows of that ancient sanctum, that the knights conducted their forbidden excavations. With hands trained for war now steady as scholars, they descended into the bowels of forgotten corridors, prying loose stone slabs and crawling through darkened tunnels carved by civilizations long vanished. There, beneath the mount, they discovered chambers untouched by time, vaults sealed with symbols that bore no cross, no Latin, but spirals and star patterns that spoke to an order far older than the church. Inside these hidden rooms were not treasures of gold or silver, but scrolls wrapped in brittle cloth, written in tongues unknown to Europe, inked with diagrams of stars, human anatomy, and sacred geometry. These were not mere relics. They were teachings. Teachings that challenged the very foundations of Christian doctrine. One scroll described the temple as more than a place of worship. It was a machine of divine alignment, a conduit between earth and heavens, mapped not by prayer, but by mathematics. Another text hinted at bloodlines preserved in secrecy. Guardianship passed not through royalty, but through initiates bound by silence. As they read, the knights began to change. What had started as a mission of faith began to evolve into something deeper, a secret priesthood formed not by the Vatican, but by the earth itself. These revelations were never recorded in any Templar chronicle. They were kept in coded manuscripts, whispered only in inner circles, and protected by the fierce loyalty of those who now saw themselves as the heirs of a sacred truth. These forbidden excavations became the cornerstone of a knowledge war between the Order and Rome. While the Church preached salvation through obedience, the scrolls preached divine connection through understanding, and that understanding had been buried, quite literally, by those who feared it. The Templars, now transformed by what they uncovered, would carry these secrets back to Europe, not in open confession, but through architecture, ritual, and encoded symbols that would defy detection for centuries. Yet it all began here, in the dark, in the silence, in the dust-choked chambers under Solomon's Temple, where 9 knights became more than warriors. They became the keepers of a forbidden inheritance, one that would shape empires, birth legends, and haunt the church for generations. Deep within the roots of the Temple Mount, beneath layers of shattered stone and the weight of centuries, the Templars may have found something far more dangerous than gold. Ancient Jewish legends long whispered that King Solomon, known not just for his riches but for his unparalleled wisdom, sealed away secrets too powerful for common men. Some said these were scrolls of divine science. Others spoke of artifacts capable of bending reality itself. But the most feared legend was that of a hidden vault, constructed by Solomon, using a geometry gifted by angels, guarded not by locks, but by knowledge. It was into this myth that the Templars stepped. As they cleared rubble and mapped the underground labyrinth, their torches revealed more than just hollow chambers. They uncovered pillars engraved with non-Hebrew characters, symbols blending Egyptian, Phoenician, and something older, something alien to the known world. There were altars not built for sacrifice, but for energy, echoing the arrangement of the stars above. And then, there was the vault. Its entrance was marked by a star within a circle, surrounded by interlocking triangles, and sealed with a pressure mechanism that no medieval mind should have understood. Inside, the air was cold and unnaturally still, as if untouched since the days of Solomon himself. There were no piles of gold, no jeweled crowns. What the Templars found were boxes, stone and wood, filled with parchment and tablets etched in code. The contents were a blend of mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and something else. Something that suggested consciousness itself could be shaped, tuned, and passed. like a current. These were not the teachings of any known prophet. These were the operating principles of the universe, as understood by a king said to speak with God. The knights, awestruck and unsettled, understood instantly why this had been hidden and why no church would ever allow such truths to surface. They believed they had stumbled upon the source of Solomon's power, a power not bestowed by heaven, but drawn from the very fabric of creation. And so they made a pact, sealed by blood and silence. The knowledge would be copied in secret, studied in the deepest halls of the order, and never revealed to the outside world. For in these vaults lay not just the foundation of their new purpose, but the potential to undo the religious structure of Europe. The church preached salvation through obedience. Solomon's vault preached power through understanding. It was not a difference of theology. It was a declaration of war. From that moment, the Templars ceased to be mere knights of the cross. They became something else entirely. Protectors of a legacy buried by kings and hunted by popes. And at the heart of that legacy was a vault no one dared speak of, except in whispers carried by stone. When the Templars returned to Europe after nearly a decade beneath the sacred ground of Jerusalem, they were not the same men who had once pledged themselves to defend the roads to the Holy Land. They came back transformed, not just in purpose, but in knowledge. In lands where cathedrals had once been crude and utilitarian, they now raised structures that defied the architectural understanding of the time. Suddenly, these warrior monks were speaking in terms of proportion, celestial alignment, and harmonic resonance. Their command of sacred geometry, a discipline thought lost with the ancients, astonished masons and scholars alike. But this was not mere theory. Across France, England, and Iberia, Templar chapels began to appear with designs that seemed guided by invisible hands. Vaulted ceilings curved to precise ratios, rose windows echoed the structure of star maps, and entire buildings were aligned with astronomical solstices and equinoxes. Their constructions whispered of secrets far older than Christianity. At Chartres, at Tomar, and even in the simple chapels of forgotten villages, these men created stone resonators, embedding within them symbols and angles that spoke to a cosmic language. It was as if they had learned not just how to build, but how to tune a space like an instrument, drawing energy through sacred form. Traditional masons spoke in awe of Templar proportions that mirrored those found in ancient Egyptian temples, suggesting a lineage of knowledge that had somehow leapt centuries. How could soldiers know the golden ratio? How could they map the stars with such precision, or design with a geometry known only to those who studied in Alexandria or Babylon? The answer, buried in their silence, always pointed back to what they had uncovered under the Temple Mount. They were not simply using ancient techniques. They were reviving an entire system of wisdom that viewed geometry as divine language. Every angle had meaning. Every circle, a message. This was not decoration. It was encryption. Through sacred geometry, the Templars encoded their beliefs, their discoveries, and their warnings into architecture. The church did not understand these forms, but the Templars did not build for bishops. They built for initiates, for those who could read the stone. Within these structures, the legacy of Solomon was hidden in plain sight. The cross was not just a symbol. It was a key. And the buildings they left behind were not monuments, but maps. To the ordinary eye, they were beautiful. To those who knew, they were revelations carved into rock. The knights had become more than guardians. They were now architects of the invisible, carrying forward the mathematics of the sacred, the silence of the vault, and the geometry of the divine. And through each chapel, each column, and each echoing arch, they told a story the church could not read and dared not ask. Long before the Templars set foot in Jerusalem, another secretive brotherhood walked the dusty paths of the Holy Land, hidden from Roman eyes and priestly judgment. They were the Essenes, a Jewish sect known for their withdrawal from society, their ascetic practices, and their obsession with purity, prophecy, and ancient wisdom. Living in caves near Qumran and in isolated communities, they copied sacred texts by hand, guarded scrolls no temple dared to keep, and spoke of a coming age where light would rise against the forces of corruption. When the Templars began their mysterious excavations beneath Solomon's temple, some believe it was the remnants of the Essenes' legacy they uncovered. Scrolls buried in stone jars, manuscripts sealed in clay, and symbols etched into hidden walls matched no Christian or Islamic design, but bore striking resemblance to those found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, a library of forbidden knowledge the Church would not admit existed until centuries later. More than coincidence, the parallels between the two orders grew difficult to ignore. Both the Essenes and the Templars lived under strict codes of secrecy and discipline. Both embraced ritual purification, communal living, and hierarchies known only to their initiates. And most curiously, both orders centered their lives around the preservation of a sacred truth, one that could not be voiced aloud, only protected. Some researchers believe that the Templars may have found more than texts. They may have found a surviving lineage, a handful of hidden Essene descendants who had passed their teachings down in silence, generation after generation. Through whispered traditions and encoded signs, the Templars could have absorbed a deeper mission, one rooted not in the Crusades, but in prophecy. This would explain the shift seen in the order after their 9-year silence, when their outward purpose as protectors of pilgrims was quietly replaced with something far older and more profound. The Essenes spoke of a teacher of righteousness, a spiritual figure said to carry divine knowledge, born not of doctrine but of blood and light. Some legends claim the Templars came to see themselves as guardians of this line, a bloodline imbued with a spark that defied papal authority and echoed the pure flame of ancient Israel. Whether through surviving texts, relics, or human contact, the knowledge they carried back to Europe bore unmistakable traces of Essene mysticism. In their rites, in their codes, and in the architecture they left behind, traces of Qumran and the desert prophets pulsed beneath every stone. To the Church, these connections were dangerous, suggesting that the Templars' loyalties lay not with Rome, but with something older and ungoverned. By weaving themselves into the legacy of the Essenes, the Templars became more than knights. They became vessels of an underground current, flowing from the caves of prophets to the halls of cathedrals, carrying a secret the world was never meant to see. What began as a vow to protect pilgrims and secure the roads to Jerusalem was quietly replaced by something far older and infinitely more dangerous. As the Templars delved deeper into the ruins beneath Solomon's temple, what they found did not just enlighten them, it redefined them. Their mission, once rooted in service to Rome, now pulsed with a different rhythm, one whispered through ancient stone and echoed in forgotten scrolls. Beneath the sacred mount, among relics lost to time and texts wrapped in silence, they found evidence of a covenant not spoken of in any church doctrine. This was not the covenant of the Gospels, but one predating Christianity, bound not by the authority of popes or kings, but by knowledge and sacred duty. The Templars began to see themselves not as mere knights, but as custodians of something Solomon himself may have sworn to protect. The text they uncovered described a pact between heaven and a chosen few, a promise tied to sacred geometry, celestial order, and the preservation of a divine lineage. This covenant was not about worship, but about stewardship. It called for guardians, men who would stand in silence against the distortion of sacred truths. And it was this call the Templars answered. Their symbols changed, their rituals deepened, They no longer fought for earthly thrones. They began building churches and commanderies aligned with the stars, encoding the knowledge they had uncovered into stone, and initiating a new generation of brothers into this reborn purpose. Rome believed they were loyal soldiers. In truth, they were something else entirely. They had become inheritors of a secret priesthood, a chain that reached back to the temple's original builders and perhaps beyond. The knights guarded this secret not with swords alone, but with silence, signs, and the construction of sacred space. In every stone laid and every symbol carved, they honored the covenant that now defined them. Some say that this moment marked the beginning of the hidden war between the Church and the Templars, a conflict not of armies but of narratives. The Church preached obedience. The covenant demanded understanding. The Church claimed divine authority through succession. The covenant spoke of divine presence through alignment and wisdom. These two paths could not coexist, and deep in the vaults beneath Jerusalem, the Templars chose theirs. What rose from those tunnels was not a new order, but a continuation of something long buried. A mission to protect a truth the world was not ready to receive. The Templars would continue to build, to fight, and to serve, but not for Rome. They now served something older, a vow, older than Scripture, a covenant carved in silence. In the quiet hours after their descent beneath the Temple Mount, after the scrolls had been unwrapped and the secrets revealed, the Templars bound themselves to a new vow, one that would never be spoken from a pulpit or inscribed in any church record. This was not a vow of service to king or pope. It was the first seal of silence, a sacred bond that transformed the order from a military brotherhood into a vessel of forbidden knowledge. Those who had touched the hidden wisdom of Solomon understood its danger, not merely to the church, but to the entire architecture of power built upon ignorance. What they had uncovered could not be shared without consequence. It had to be guarded, buried again, but this time not in stone, but in flesh. The seal was not just an oath, it was a transformation. The brothers who entered the inner circle were marked, not with fire or blade, but through ritual steeped in ancient symbolism, invoking the names of those who had guarded sacred knowledge before them. Their silence was not merely for protection, it was preservation. They became living archives, men who carried truths too explosive to commit to parchment. Each Templar entrusted with this knowledge was carefully chosen, rigorously tested, and ritually bound to never speak of what they knew except through symbols, architecture, and encoded gestures. The order began to divide, not with conflict, but with purpose. There were the outer knights, brave and visible, defenders of pilgrims and cities. Then there were the inner guardians, unseen and silent, their duty far more complex. These were the men who traveled to ancient ruins, who met with scholars under false names, who hid fragments of the vault's teachings in carvings, blueprints, and sacred geometry. They operated in a world between light and shadow, masking truth in beauty, ritual, and myth. Blood oaths bound them to one another. Betrayal meant erasure, not just of name, but of memory. Some say the inner Templars kept genealogical records, mapping not only noble lines but lines of initiation, tracing those who had the capacity to receive the knowledge and carry it forward. These were not bloodlines of royalty, but of resonance. The seal was passed generation to generation, through rites the church would have called heresy. And yet it endured, because the seal was more than silence. It was survival. The Templars knew that what they protected could not be trusted to scrolls or stone. It had to be encrypted in humanity itself. From this moment forward, the order was no longer just an army. It became a hidden school, a network of keepers, whispering in the language of symbols, sworn to guard a truth that kings would kill for and popes would burn to silence. The first seal of silence was not meant to be broken. It was meant to echo through blood. When the Templars returned from Jerusalem and their reputation began to spread across Europe, the Church moved quickly, cloaking its response in the language of divine favor. But underneath the blessings and official recognition was a current of suspicion and fear. In the early years of the 12th century, Pope Honorius granted them formal status, and later, Pope Innocent gave them protections no other order had received. The Templars could operate without paying taxes, they answered to no king, and even bishops had no authority over them. To the common believer, it seemed as if the Church had embraced these knights with open arms, raising them to the highest pedestal of holy service. But within the corridors of the Vatican, among the secret councils and private chambers, concern was growing. The Templars had become too powerful too quickly, and more importantly, too silent. They amassed wealth at a pace unmatched by any noble house, and their building projects showed architectural understanding that could not be explained by war or pilgrimage. Their secrecy was not just operational, it was theological. Rumors began to leak. Whispers of strange rituals, of hidden scrolls, of alliances with scholars deemed heretical by the Church. The Vatican, steeped in centuries of protecting its monopoly on divine interpretation, could not allow any force, no matter how loyal in appearance, to possess sacred knowledge that escaped its control. Papal blessings were not gifts. They were chains, forged in parchment and sealed with rings. By bringing the Templars under the protection of the Church, the Vatican hoped to contain them, to bind their growing influence within the walls of canon law. But the Templars, already sworn to the first seal of silence and loyal to a covenant far older than Rome, maneuvered around these attempts with the discipline of a secret society. They accepted papal privileges while shielding their true purpose. They bowed before altars while embedding sacred geometry into stone cathedrals that held a message only the initiated could read. The Church's embrace became a mask, a careful dance between appearances and quiet rebellion. For a time, it worked. The Templars grew in wealth and mystery, while the Church claimed them as holy instruments of its will. But those who watched closely could see the cracks forming. The Templars did not preach. They did not recruit openly. Their leaders were not priests, and their power lay not in sermons, but in silence. Rome, the eternal city of authority, had birthed something it could no longer command. It had mistaken submission for strategy, obedience for concealment. And in time, the Vatican would come to realize that the Templars were not simply warriors of the cross. They were guardians of a secret the Church itself could never possess. Papal approval was granted, yes, but it was never trust. It was fear, cloaked in ceremony. A fear that would one day ignite the flames of betrayal. To the world, the Templars were marked by the red cross upon their tunics, a symbol so simple and so sacred that it came to define them in the eyes of both friend and foe. It was said to represent sacrifice, purity, and service to God, and the Church welcomed its visibility as a sign of unquestionable loyalty. But behind its crimson threads lay a deeper, older meaning. The cross was never just a symbol. It was a code, a geometric cipher drawn not from the pages of Christian doctrine, but from the ancient design of Solomon's temple itself. Within its forearms and central point were proportions matching the layout of the temple's inner sanctum, echoing the cardinal alignments used by early Masons who believed in the divine resonance of space and form. The red hue was no mere aesthetic choice either. It mirrored the color of the ancient seal of Melchizedek, the high priest king referenced in both Hebrew texts and early Christian mysticism, a figure who stood outside the priesthood of Levi and closer to the hidden priesthood the Templars came to embody. Each line of the cross intersected with exact ratios, encoding principles found not in scripture, but in the measurements of ancient temples and star charts. To the uninitiated, it was a banner of faith. To those within the inner circle, it was a declaration of knowledge and allegiance to a truth buried beneath Jerusalem. The horizontal beam represented the earthly realm, the vertical line the celestial. Where they crossed marked the sacred point of communion, the exact position of the Holy of Holies within Solomon's design. Those trained in the order's deeper teachings could use the symbol to unlock hidden texts, find encoded references in Templar structures, and even decipher maps left for future guardians. This was why the symbol was painted with such care, stitched with such precision, and guarded with such intensity. The Red Cross was a portable vault, a visual encryption of the covenant they had sworn to protect. It appeared in stained glass, carved in stone, and painted onto shields not just as a sign of unity, but as a message in plain sight. While the Church embraced it as a symbol of piety, the Templars used it as a talisman, drawing strength from its resonance with the sacred architecture of the past. It was their mark, yes, but also their mirror, reflecting not who they served, but what they knew. And in a world ruled by symbols, where few could read beyond the surface, the Templars walked among the masses cloaked in revelation. With every step they took, that red cross pulsed, not with blind faith, but with the silent geometry of a forgotten temple, whispering a truth the Church would never see. Rising like a stone hymn from the French countryside, the Cathedral of Chartres appears to the ordinary eye as just another triumph of medieval devotion. Yet within its soaring towers and sacred shadows lies one of the most advanced architectural enigmas in human history, a code in stone that whispers the presence of the Templars. Unlike other Gothic structures of its time, Chartres does not conform to the standard measures of medieval design. Instead, its dimensions follow celestial harmonics, ratios that mirror planetary cycles and star positions known only to ancient astronomers. The placement of its towers, its labyrinth, and even its stained glass windows align with astronomical phenomena that suggest the hands that built it were guided not only by faith, but by a knowledge system centuries ahead of its age. The northern tower, in particular, stands as a beacon not just of stone, but of precision. Scholars have since discovered that its angles match the rising of Sirius, the star long associated with divine knowledge in Egyptian and Hermetic traditions. Such a detail could not have been coincidental. The Templars, who held influence in the region and connections to the builders, are believed by many to have provided the hidden blueprint. Within the cathedral, the famed labyrinth carved into the floor is not a simple religious symbol, but a cosmic diagram, its path echoing ancient rites of initiation and the movement of heavenly bodies. At the very center of the labyrinth once stood a copper plate, now lost to time, but rumored to contain symbols linked to Solomon's temple, and perhaps even to the scrolls unearthed beneath it. The crypt beneath Chartres is even older than the current structure above, and legend says it was built over a sacred spring once used by the Druids, making the site a convergence of spiritual energy long before Christianity arrived. This layering of belief systems, wrapped in geometry and astronomical precision, is not the work of chance. It is the signature of an order that understood the power of place, symbol, and silence. The Templars may not have left their cross on the walls, but their presence is carved into the very bones of Chartres. Their influence is found in the way light moves through the cathedral on solstice mornings, in the way certain points of the structure resonate like tuned instruments, and in the hidden proportions that reveal not only mathematical mastery, but metaphysical intent. Chartres was not built to impress. It was built to transmit. Like the vault beneath Solomon's temple, It holds secrets, not meant to be read, but to be experienced. And those who know how to listen to stone, those who understand the silence of symbols, know that this cathedral is not just a house of worship. It is a temple of memory, a monument to knowledge the church could not destroy, because it never even knew it was there. When the first fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls were pulled from caves near Qumran in the mid-20th century, the world believed it had stumbled upon a lost chapter of biblical history, but for those who understood the Templars' hidden mission, it was something far more unsettling. Among the ancient Hebrew texts and apocalyptic prophecies were passages that bore an uncanny resemblance to symbols, phrases, and cosmological concepts found in surviving Templar manuscripts. It was as if these scrolls, written more than 1,000 years before the founding of the order, were speaking in the same code. Certain diagrams in the scrolls, showing the divisions of time and the movements of the heavens, matched the geometric layouts found in Templar-built chapels. Phrases referring to the Sons of Light guarding the knowledge of the temple echoed language the Templars had inscribed in secret margins of their own rule, never meant to be seen by outside eyes. Some scrolls referenced the Teacher of Righteousness, a mysterious figure whose role was not that of a prophet or king, but a revealer of divine law preserved from Solomon's time, a guardian of hidden wisdom. This figure, some researchers now argue, mirrors the role the Templars assigned to Hugues de Payens within their earliest initiation rites. Even more curious were the fragments discussing a temple that was not made of stone, but of pattern, light, and time. A spiritual structure that could be built only by those who knew the true measures, a sacred architecture that was encoded in the stars. That idea, nearly incomprehensible to modern religious frameworks, fit perfectly with the Templar obsession with sacred geometry and celestial alignment. Could it be that the Templars had not only uncovered Solomon's vault, but documents that aligned directly with what the Essenes had preserved in Qumran? The parallels were too sharp, too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. And yet the Church, which had long tried to keep the scrolls under scholarly lock and key, remained publicly silent on the deeper implications. For the Templars, this discovery was not new. It was confirmation, a thread of continuity running through time, linking Solomon's hidden knowledge to the Essenes' guardianship, and finally to their own silent covenant. In private libraries, in coded texts, and in the very foundations of their buildings, the Templars mirrored the insights that the Dead Sea Scrolls had buried beneath desert stone. The scrolls had survived in jars of clay. The Templars had preserved the same truths in living rituals, blood-bound oaths, and temples of stone. And while the world marveled at the scrolls as relics of a distant past, those who walked the deeper paths knew they were echoes of a wisdom that never vanished, only waited, in silence, for those who could still hear it. In quiet chapels scattered across Europe, hidden in corners of cathedrals or placed at the heart of rural shrines, statues of the Black Madonna stood draped in robes of mystery, her dark features and solemn gaze, unlike the pale, serene Virgin taught by the Church. To the masses, she was a curiosity. To the Templars, she was a cipher. Her presence in Templar commanderies was not incidental, nor was it a matter of local devotion. The Black Madonna represented a link to something older than Christianity, a force that transcended religious dogma. Her imagery echoed the ancient goddesses of fertility, wisdom, and hidden power, revered in civilizations long before the rise of Rome. From Isis in Egypt to Inanna in Mesopotamia, the dark-skinned mother figure had always stood as a keeper of mystery, life, and transformation. The Templars, steeped in the hidden teachings they uncovered beneath the Temple Mount, understood this symbolism and encoded it into their veneration. They did not worship her in the way the Church prescribed. They revered what she represented: The feminine aspect of the divine, the sacred balance to the masculine principle enshrined in most religious orders. The Black Madonna was not simply Mary reimagined. She was the physical embodiment of the hidden wisdom the Templars had sworn to protect. In some of the oldest Templar sites, including Chartres and Rocamadour, her statues were placed over wells and beneath vaults, symbolizing access to the underworld of knowledge, to water, to womb, to memory. These placements were never random. They were precise, aligned with celestial cycles and subterranean currents. The Templars studied through sacred geometry. Her darkness, so often misunderstood, was not a mark of sin or foreignness. It was a symbol of the unknowable, the fertile void from which all life and all understanding emerged. The Church, unprepared to face such esoteric interpretations, tolerated her image but never embraced her meaning. And so she remained hidden in plain sight, like the truths, the Templars, buried in stone. Whispered traditions within the order claimed that the Black Madonna guarded a bloodline, a secret thread of divine feminine power linked to Solomon, to the Essenes, and even to a sacred lineage obscured by time. Whether this was myth or memory, it was enough to warrant her protection. To those within the first seal of silence, she was more than a statue. She was a sentinel, a reminder that the divine was not only masculine, not only fire and sword, but also womb and shadow, intuition and silence. Her presence in Templar commanderies was a quiet rebellion against the patriarchal lens of the Church. Through her, the Templars preserved the echo of the feminine divine, cloaked in stone and mystery, waiting for the day when her message could rise again, not in words, but in awakening. Behind the veils of relics and rituals, beyond the myths of lost grails and secret treasures, there lingers a far more dangerous theory. One that suggests the Templars were not merely guardians of sacred objects, but protectors of a sacred lineage. According to hidden accounts and coded fragments preserved within their inner circle, the order believed that a divine bloodline had survived the collapse of ancient Israel, a line that traced its roots not only to King David, but through Solomon, and possibly even earlier to the mysterious figure of Melchizedek. This bloodline was not revered for royal entitlement, but for its perceived spiritual resonance, a genetic inheritance tied to an ancient covenant that transcended both Judaism and Christianity. The Templars, shaped by the secrets they uncovered beneath the Temple Mount and the scrolls whispering of divine architecture and hidden wisdom, came to believe that this lineage carried a sacred potential, the ability to receive and transmit divine knowledge through blood, through body, through being. It was not about power in the worldly sense, but about stewardship. They saw themselves not as the heirs of that bloodline, but its silent defenders, guardians of a legacy, encoded in the human vessel itself. The presence of the Black Madonna in their sanctuaries, the geometric codes embedded in their architecture, and the rituals never shared with the Church all pointed to this hidden mission. The legends of the Holy Grail, so often reduced to a mere cup, may have been symbolic of this very idea. Not a chalice, but a vessel of flesh, a bloodline, a living continuity of sacred knowledge that could not be copied or faked, only protected. Whispers among esoteric circles even suggest that the Templars transported this lineage from the Holy Land to Europe, concealing its existence through arranged marriages, remote settlements, and encoded symbols placed in plain sight. Certain families, cloaked in obscurity, may have carried the seed of this ancient covenant across generations. And while the Vatican spun tales of holy wars and relics of Christ, the Templars quietly watched over a truth far older and far more volatile. This belief reshaped their purpose. Their silence became necessity, not merely to avoid political persecution, but to shield a truth that, if revealed, would undermine every claim of divine right the Church and monarchy had ever made. The idea that divinity was not bestowed by authority, but inherited by essence, would destroy the foundation of empires. So the Templars protected the bloodline as they would a flame in the wind, in secrecy, in shadow, in stone. And though they left no public record, no confession, their every action from the moment they emerged from Jerusalem speaks of a mission far deeper than holy war. They were not knights of conquest, they were guardians of memory, protectors not of myth, but of living legacy, a bloodline the world was never meant to know. Within less than a generation, the Templars transformed from a handful of obscure warrior monks into one of the most powerful organizations Europe had ever seen. But this meteoric rise cannot be explained by military strategy or papal favor alone. Beneath the surface of their public image, the Templars operated with knowledge and precision that seemed to defy the limitations of their time. They knew where to build, when to strike, and how to manipulate political currents as if guided by invisible hands. Their influence grew not only from their success on the battlefield, but from their understanding of sacred geometry, natural law, and human psychology, all rooted in the forbidden wisdom they had uncovered beneath Solomon's temple. They offered protection for pilgrims, yes, but also created the first reliable system of international banking, allowing nobles and kings to deposit wealth in one land and retrieve it in another. This innovation alone shook the economic foundations of medieval Europe, but it was more than just finance. The Templars understood the energetic properties of land, building their commanderies on sites of ancient power and aligning their structures with celestial bodies. Their buildings resonated not just with faith, but with frequency. They attracted not only believers, but thinkers, mystics, and architects who sensed something deeper behind their stony facades. Nobles entrusted them with treasures. Monarchs sought their counsel. Even popes, who officially outranked them, tread lightly in their presence. The order grew into a network of intelligence, influence, and infrastructure that spanned from the deserts of the Holy Land to the courts of Western Europe. Yet, at its core remained an inner circle bound by the first seal of silence. They never revealed their sources of knowledge, never spoke of the scrolls, or the vault, or the bloodline. They let the world believe their rise was divine favor, when in truth it was divine understanding. The wisdom they protected was not ornamental. It was strategic, and it worked. Within 50 years of their formation, they held lands across every major kingdom in Europe, commanded fleets, and built some of the most advanced structures of the era. Their influence extended into royal marriages, legal systems, and theological debate, all while maintaining the image of humble service. But it was this very duality, the balance between public humility and private mastery, that made them unstoppable. They were never just warriors. They were planners. They were guardians. They were alchemists of power, transforming ancient truths into modern influence. And though their rise appeared miraculous, it was anything but. It was calculated, intentional, and fueled by the forbidden fire they had unearthed in Jerusalem. With wisdom came power, and with power they stepped into a realm few dared to touch. A realm where faith was a mask and knowledge was the true crown. At first, the Vatican watched the Templars with satisfaction, proud of the order they had blessed, the warriors who defended Christendom and built fortresses in God's name. But as the decades passed, that satisfaction soured into unease. The Templars were no longer simply knights. They were becoming something else entirely. They moved across Europe with impunity, collecting wealth, forging alliances, and speaking in a language the Church could not read. Their commanderies operated like sovereign territories. Their rituals were closed to priests. Their symbols echoed with meanings the Vatican had never approved. And worst of all, they answered to no bishop, no king, not even to Rome itself. The papal court began to whisper. Cardinals raised quiet concerns. Reports from informants painted a troubling picture of an order that no longer functioned as a religious extension of the Church, but as a rival authority, one rooted not in Scripture, but in something older and far more elusive. The Templars held secrets. That much was certain, but it was what those secrets represented that began to haunt the halls of the Vatican. The Church had always maintained control through doctrine, fear, and exclusivity over salvation. But the Templars, through their silent architecture and encoded knowledge, suggested a different kind of access to the Divine One that bypassed Rome entirely. Their cathedrals radiated with mathematical perfection. Their vaults overflowed with gold, and their silence only deepened the mystique. What was once seen as loyalty now resembled quiet defiance. The Vatican's power was rooted in being the sole gatekeeper of heaven. But what if the Templars had found another gate? One buried beneath the Temple Mount, wrapped in scrolls, and guarded by silence. Rome could not tolerate this possibility, so its gaze began to shift. Officially, nothing changed. The Church still praised the Templars, still allowed them to operate freely. But behind closed doors, strategies were forming. Letters were sent, alliances were tested. New inquisitors were trained. Men not interested in heresy among peasants, but in threats at the heart of Christendom. And among those threats, none loomed larger than the Templars. The Vatican began to plant seeds of doubt, spreading rumors of strange rituals and secret idols, whispering that the order had strayed from the light. It was a subtle campaign, designed to fracture public perception and isolate the knights from their supporters. The Templars, for their part, remained outwardly calm, but within the inner circle, the alarm had already been sounded. They knew the Church feared what it did not control, and feared even more what it could not understand. The Templars had walked too far from Rome's shadow. They had become a mirror, reflecting a deeper truth the Church refused to face. And now that mirror was cracking. Rome's gaze, once warm and blessing, had turned cold. It no longer saw warriors. It saw heretics cloaked in silence. And the countdown to confrontation had quietly begun. Buried in the archives of a private European collector and only surfacing through whispered channels of academic rumor, the so-called Scroll of Fire remains one of the most controversial and haunting manuscripts ever linked to the Templars. Said to have been discovered in a concealed compartment beneath an abandoned Templar chapel in southern France during the early 20th century, the scroll was wrapped in deteriorated animal hide, inscribed not in Latin, but in a hybrid of Hebrew and coded Aramaic symbols. The parchment, brittle and faded, bore no title. Only a single emblem at the top that resembled the fusion of Solomon's seal and the Templar cross, bisected by a vertical flame. Scholars who allegedly reviewed it under strict secrecy described its contents as disturbing and unlike any known medieval text. The scroll spoke not of battle or doctrine, but of light and transformation, of rituals performed in deep silence beneath Jerusalem, involving sacred geometry, invocations of angelic names, and diagrams of a radiant temple not made of stone, but of energy. Central to its message was the claim that Solomon's original temple was not simply a place of worship, but a machine of divine resonance, built to channel cosmic forces when aligned with specific celestial events. The scroll instructed its reader not in how to build such a structure, but how to become it. Through a process of ritual purification, meditation on sacred proportions, and spoken phrases known only to the initiated, one could allegedly awaken a dormant potential within the human body, aligning it with the same principles that structured the heavens. The final pages hinted at a secret rite, performed once by the inner circle of Templars during the 9th year of their excavation beneath the Temple Mount, which they believed had awakened a presence buried beneath the foundations, something referred to only as the voice of fire. This entity, whether symbolic or real, was described as a guardian of the covenant, a being of pure order and light, bound by the ancient agreement between heaven and earth. The scroll offered no names, no dates, only symbols, sequences, and warnings. It declared that only those of the proper bloodline, carrying the inner vibration of the covenant, could survive the ritual intact. Whether the scroll is genuine or a masterful fabrication remains debated in esoteric circles. But what is undeniable is how precisely it aligns with other fragments found in Templar manuscripts and oral traditions preserved through secret societies. If real, the Scroll of Fire may be the last surviving echo of the forbidden rites carried out beneath Solomon's temple, proof not only of the Templars' deeper mission, but of the ancient forces they believed they had touched. It is not just a manuscript. It is a whisper from the flame that once burned in silence. Behind the grand ceremonies that paraded the Templars as noble warriors of Christ, cloaked in white and emblazoned with the Red Cross, there existed another path, one hidden from the public, reserved only for those chosen by the inner circle. This path was not about knighthood or loyalty to the church, but about transformation, and it began with what came to be known as the dual initiation rites. These rites were not simply religious ceremonies. They were initiations into a lineage of ancient priesthood, echoing the sacred rituals performed by Solomon's inner priests in the hidden sanctums of the temple. The Templars, after their long and secret excavation beneath the Temple Mount, believed they had rediscovered not just relics and scrolls, but living practices passed down from the days when the temple was more than a building. It was a place where heaven and earth aligned. The first initiation was external, a rite of passage into the brotherhood, publicly celebrated with vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But the second, hidden rite, was performed in silence, beneath the earth, or within chambers aligned with the stars. This second rite was not written down. It was transmitted orally, guarded fiercely, and shrouded in layers of symbolism. Candidates were blindfolded and led through geometric paths, meant to symbolize the inner journey of the soul from ignorance to light. They would meditate on symbols carved into stone, some traced to ancient Hebrew mysticism, others drawn from Egyptian rites of rebirth. At the climax of the ritual, the initiate stood at the center of a sacred diagram, most often a version of the flower of life, etched into the floor, and was anointed not with oil, but with a powder of unknown origin, said to awaken the inner senses. The initiate was then shown a relic, always cloaked, whose nature was never spoken of outside the rite, believed to be either a fragment from the original temple or a representation of the covenant itself. The purpose of this dual path was to separate the warrior from the priest. A knight may defend the innocent, but only a priest knight could protect the knowledge. Those who completed both rites were given a new name, known only within the inner sanctum, and from that moment forward were bound by the first seal of silence. These inner Templars operated as guardians, not of lands, but of memory, weaving the teachings of Solomon's priesthood into the very stones of the commanderies they helped design. The Church never knew of these rituals, and if it did suspect them, it could never penetrate their layers of secrecy. To the outer world, the Templars were holy warriors, but within their core lived a second truth, a sacred duty that linked them directly to the ancient temple, not in stone, but in spirit. And through these rites, that flame was passed from soul to soul, priest to priest, in a chain unbroken by time or sword. Beneath the ornate carvings and ethereal silence of Rosslyn Chapel, nestled deep in the Scottish countryside, lies a mystery that refuses to sleep. A chamber long whispered about by historians, mystics, and truth-seekers, said to be a sealed vault holding the final echoes of the Templar priesthood. From the moment one steps into the chapel, it becomes clear this is no ordinary Christian house of worship. Every inch of stone, every curve of the arches, every symbol etched into the pillars speaks a language lost to time. A language that does not serve dogma, but encodes memory. The apprentice pillar, the most famous of all, coils with floral designs that mirror the tree of life from Kabbalistic tradition, a sacred diagram found in ancient Hebrew texts and linked to the teachings uncovered beneath the Temple Mount. High above, stars and celestial patterns align with constellations on specific equinoxes, and below the chapel, rumors speak of sealed doors and soundless corridors. While the official church history ignores these features, independent researchers and descendants of old Scottish families have passed down stories that say Rosslyn was built not just to honor God, but to guard a legacy. According to Templar tradition, after the persecution began and the order was outlawed in France, a fleet of ships vanished from La Rochelle. Many believe they carried not gold, but knowledge, and that they sailed north, finding safe harbor in the lands of trusted allies. Rosslyn, commissioned by William Sinclair, whose bloodline traces directly to those same hidden circles, became the last stronghold. Within its foundations, the architecture mimics the proportions of Solomon's temple, with chambers laid out to reflect both celestial and spiritual pathways. Deep beneath the chapel, a hidden chamber never officially opened has long been rumored to hold scrolls, relics, and ritual tools preserved from the order's sacred rites. Some even claim it contains a replica of the Holy of Holies, crafted not for display but for activation during private ceremonies. Echoes of ancient chants, recorded by sound engineers, have revealed frequencies embedded within the structure. Frequencies that resonate with the same mathematical patterns found in sacred sites across Jerusalem. For those who understand sacred geometry, Rosslyn is not simply symbolic, it is functional. It is a coded vessel that links back to the very temple the Templars excavated centuries earlier. The chapel serves not just as a monument to the past, but as a time-locked message waiting for the right mind or the right bloodline to decipher. Every stone, every shadow, every carved angel holds a fragment of the truth, assembled like a puzzle only the initiated can read. Rosslyn was not the end of the Templar legacy. It was the sanctuary of its most sacred knowledge. And while its secrets remain entombed in silence, those who listen closely enough can still hear Jerusalem whispering through its walls. Hidden beneath the clash of swords and the roar of crusades lies a far quieter and more subversive story. One not told in papal records or royal decrees. It is a story of dialogue, of mutual recognition, and of a shared reverence for the mysteries of the divine. During their years in the Holy Land, the Templars encountered not only the armies of Islam but also its mystics, the Sufis, seekers of divine union through inner transformation. These were men who spoke in symbols, moved in silence, and saw the world not as a battlefield, but as a mirror of the soul. And it was among these mystics that the Templars found strange and unexpected familiarity. Both groups lived by codes. Both kept secrets. Both trace their wisdom to Solomon, the prophet king who, in Islamic tradition, was not only wise, but a master of the jinn, the builder of a temple imbued with divine knowledge. In Sufi poetry, Solomon is the archetype of the illuminated ruler, the one who speaks the language of all creatures and holds the seal of truth. The Templars, having uncovered fragments of this tradition beneath the Temple Mount, began to recognize a thread running through both their own discoveries and the teachings of these Muslim mystics. Historical records mention truces, letters exchanged, even instances where Templars spared Sufi scholars while other orders slaughtered without mercy. In rare and unpublicized accounts, some Templars were said to have visited Sufi gatherings in disguise, listening to teachings about the breath of God, the geometry of the heart, and the unfolding of divine names across the fabric of creation. In turn, certain Sufi sects began referring to the Templars not as infidels, but as people of the book who had remembered something the others forgot. Could it be that in the quiet corners of Jerusalem, rituals were exchanged, prayers shared not in opposition, but in resonance? Some scholars believe that aspects of Templar symbolism, particularly the use of the octagon, the emphasis on inner transformation, and the numerical codes tied to the 99 names of God, bear striking resemblance to Sufi metaphysics. More than coincidence, this may point to an esoteric bridge between the traditions. The Templars were not only defending territory, they were absorbing wisdom. And while the Church preached exclusivity, the Templars walked a path of synthesis, gathering truth wherever it revealed itself. The Islamic connection was not political. It was spiritual. The Templars, guardians of a hidden covenant, recognized that divine knowledge was not bound by religion, but scattered like stars across cultures. In the Sufis, they found echoes of their own silence, and what they preserved in their scrolls and rites may include more than just Christian mysticism. It may carry the breath of a forgotten union, a shared inheritance from Solomon's sacred wisdom that once united East and West in a language beyond war. There are whispers, hushed and often dismissed by scholars loyal to the official narrative, of a collection of ancient books taken from the ruins beneath Solomon's temple, books never catalogued by the Vatican nor seen by any scribe of the Church. These texts, according to rare and fragmented accounts, were not trophies of war, but carefully preserved repositories of forbidden knowledge, some wrapped in layers of treated leather, others etched onto thin sheets of hammered copper or darkened parchment. They were unlike any Christian manuscript, written in ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Phoenician, and even undeciphered symbols that mirrored the early pictographs of pre-Abrahamic civilizations. The books described not laws or genealogies, but cosmologies, metaphysical laws, divine technologies, and rituals that defied the Church's notion of linear revelation. Some spoke of the vibrational properties of sound and stone. Others outlined principles of energy flow that paralleled what modern science might call quantum resonance. One particular fragment, later referenced in coded form by Rosicrucians, described the human body as a temple constructed by divine geometry, echoing the same principles used in Solomon's original sanctuary. The Templars, upon discovering these works, did not destroy them. They hid them, not out of greed, but necessity. For the contents of these texts, if revealed, would have undermined the authority of both church and crown. These were not heresies. They were keys. And the Templars, through their inner circle known only by symbolic names, created a secret library scattered across multiple commanderies and sealed beneath layers of coded architecture. Most of the books were kept in France, within deep stone vaults guarded by oaths and geometric locks. Others were rumored to have been smuggled to Scotland, Portugal, and even the island of Cyprus. What happened to them after the suppression of the order, remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Western esoteric history. Some say the books were burned by agents of the Inquisition. Others believe they were absorbed by secret societies that emerged in the centuries that followed. But there are still those who claim a few volumes survive, hidden in private collections or beneath ancient chapels, waiting for the day their language can be read again. These books are said to contain knowledge that predates Moses, wisdom handed down from antediluvian priest kings who understood the earth's energy grids and the soul's migration between realms. To those who hold the memory of the Templars' true mission, the vanished books are not lost. They are simply waiting for those who carry the right blood, the right silence, the right geometry of mind to find them. For within those pages lies not a myth, but a map not of territories, but of the divine architecture that binds all things. The Templars did not guard treasure. They guarded truth, and truth, once written, can never be truly erased, only hidden, only veiled, until the stars align again. In the quiet hills of central Italy stands a peculiar Templar structure known by few and studied by even fewer. A stone edifice referred to in whispered circles as the Tower of Winds. At first glance, it appears to be little more than a medieval watchtower, worn by time and tangled in ivy. But to those who understand the codes of sacred architecture, its shape, proportions, and positioning tell a story that cannot be ignored. Unlike other towers built for defense or surveillance, this structure aligns not with roads or strategic vantage points, but with the solstices, the equinoxes, and the invisible map of the stars above. The base of the tower forms an octagon, a shape revered by the Templars and long associated with the transition between earth and heaven. Each of its 8 sides points toward a cardinal or intercardinal direction, echoing ancient Hebrew interpretations of the 4 winds described in Ezekiel and mirrored in Egyptian cosmology through the 4 sons of Horus. Above the door, carved so subtly it fades into shadow, unless caught by morning light, is a symbol, a fusion of the menorah and the Eye of Ra, flanked by 2 spiraling serpents. To any other order of knights, such imagery would be considered blasphemous. But to the Templars, who had journeyed beyond dogma and into the heart of forgotten wisdom, these carvings were not decorations. They were declarations. Inside, the tower spirals upward without steps, guiding the visitor through a tight path lined with inscriptions too eroded to read fully. Yet their patterns and placements match known invocations of divine breath and elemental forces. The final chamber at the summit has no windows, only a perfectly circular opening in the ceiling, through which the sun enters precisely at noon during the spring equinox, illuminating a sigil carved into the floor, a 6-pointed star within a square, within a circle. This triad of shapes mirrors both Hebrew Merkava mysticism and Egyptian sacred geometry, suggesting the Templars were preserving and merging both traditions into something new. What message were they encoding in this tower? That time is not linear. That divinity is not confined to a single creed. That breath, light, and geometry are the true languages of the sacred. And perhaps most importantly, that Solomon's wisdom was never about conquest, but about harmony with the cosmos. The Tower of Winds was not built for war, but for memory. It was a stone manuscript, a temple in miniature, constructed to remind those who could read its signs that truth is circular, always returning, always hidden in plain sight. Few know of this tower today, and fewer still understand it. But for those who walk its spiral and stand in the center of its light, a question remains etched in stone. Not who built this, but why? And the answer lies not in books, but in wind, in silence, and in the shadow between sun and stone, scattered across the sacred landscape of Europe, from the windswept highlands of Scotland to the sunlit valleys of Spain, are Templar churches and commanderies whose layouts do not follow the conventions of medieval design, but something far older and far more celestial. These structures, when mapped and connected, do not merely mark territories or trade routes. They mirror the heavens. A cluster of chapels in southern France aligns perfectly with the constellation of Orion, while others form the shape of the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, long revered by ancient civilizations from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. This is no coincidence. It is a map, etched not on parchment but in stone. The Templars, following their mysterious excavations beneath Solomon's temple, did not return with gold, but with knowledge that reawakened the sacred science of as above, so below. They understood what ancient architects from Egypt and Sumer once knew, that the placement of sacred sites was not merely a matter of geography, but of cosmic harmony. The energy of the earth, known in ancient times as ley lines, could be activated when aligned with specific constellations, and the Templars sought to recreate these star-earth connections across the lands they occupied. At night, initiates would gather in silence beneath the vaulted ceilings of these churches, the stars above mirrored by the design beneath their feet. Pillars, arches, and windows were placed not for aesthetic beauty, but to guide celestial light during solstices and equinoxes, channeling energy into sacred chambers hidden behind altars or below crypts. One such example lies in the Church of Vera Cruz in Segovia, built with 12 sides like the zodiac, and aligned precisely with the rising of Sirius, the star once called the Eye of Isis, and associated with rebirth. But why would a Christian military order embed such pagan cosmology into their holy sites? Because they understood that the truths hidden within the stars predated religion, and that the temple they were sworn to protect was not just the stone relic in Jerusalem, but the universe itself, in miniature, in resonance, in code. These star maps served as more than architectural wonders. They were teaching tools, initiatory grounds, and energy centers. They encoded prophecies, celestial cycles, and the journey of the soul through the constellations, a path mirrored in the architecture of the heavens. The Templars did not worship stars, but they read them as a sacred text, believing that Solomon himself had aligned his temple to Orion and the Great Pyramid to Sirius. By building on earth what was written in the sky, they ensured that their knowledge would endure, not in scrolls, which could be burned, but in structures that could stand for centuries. These churches are not ruins. They are messages. And when connected, they draw a constellation of intention across the map of Europe, a silent echo of the stars that once guided kings, prophets, and now the guardians of a forgotten covenant. Hidden far from the noise of courts and cathedrals, deep within the echoing stone walls of remote Templar fortresses, there gathered a council not bound by rank or rule, but by silence. Known only to those within as the Council of Shadows, this inner circle formed the true heart of the Templar mission, far removed from the eyes of kings, popes, and even most of their own knights. These were not commanders or public faces of the order, but silent architects of its eternal purpose. They did not meet often, and when they did, it was under new moons, in circular chambers built beneath the ground, aligned to the North Star, and sealed by oaths that transcended loyalty to Rome. Their agenda was never written, never spoken outside the circle, and always centered around one task: the preservation and transmission of Solomon's true legacy. What legacy, you ask? Not gold, not a bloodline, but a body of knowledge, a sacred blueprint for divine civilization passed down through stone, ritual, and encoded symbol. Each council meeting began the same way, with the lighting of a flame in a geometric brazier said to mirror the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant. One by one, the members would place their hands on a slab carved with ancient script, reciting phrases not in Latin, but in an older tongue. Some say Phoenician, others say a derivative of pre-Babylonian priesthoods. It was here they reviewed the movement of scrolls and relics, debated the placement of future star-aligned commanderies, and recorded visions experienced during solitary meditations at Roslin, Chartres, or beneath Jerusalem itself. Each member bore not a title, but a sigil, and they communicated across distance through coded symbols carved into stones placed along pilgrimage routes or within stained glass. Their decisions shaped the unseen axis of Europe's spiritual history. While popes appointed bishops and kings redrew borders, the Council of Shadows moved relics across continents, awakened bloodlines from hidden families, and chose who would receive fragments of the knowledge that once burned bright within Solomon's temple. Some say they even influenced the designs of Gothic cathedrals, guiding masons with whispered blueprints that traced the paths of divine light. Over time, as political pressures mounted and the church turned its gaze inward with suspicion, the council's meetings grew less frequent but more urgent. They knew the storm was coming. They knew the scrolls and symbols had to be hidden in places the Vatican would never think to look. And so the Council of Shadows became more than a secret. It became a strategy, a spiritual contingency plan set in motion centuries before its time. What survives today is not the council itself, but its fingerprint, left in stone, song, and silence. And to those who know where to look, their message is clear. The light of Solomon's wisdom was never extinguished. It was simply buried, waiting to be uncovered, not by an army, but by a seeker, willing to step into the shadow and remember. There is a legend whispered among esoteric circles and buried deep in the suppressed margins of Templar lore, of a relic so sacred, so devastating in its implications, that it was never meant to be seen by the eyes of the uninitiated. It was not a chalice, nor a blade, nor a shard of the cross, but something far older and infinitely more powerful, a scroll. Known only as the relic of the Word, it was said to predate both the Torah and the Zohar, and even the inscriptions within the Ark of the Covenant. According to fragments preserved in coded form by the Council of Shadows, this scroll contained the original utterance, the vibrational formula through which creation itself was set into motion. Not a metaphor, not myth, but the literal pattern of divine intention, rendered in characters that seemed to shift when studied too long. The scroll was discovered, or rather uncovered, beneath the Temple Mount during the 9-year disappearance of the first Templar founders. It was not found in a chamber, but in what they described cryptically as the void beneath the name, a place shielded from perception, guarded not by locks, but by consciousness itself. Once unearthed, it was wrapped in a casing of blackened wood, inscribed with symbols unknown even to the scholars among them. Those who read the scroll, or attempted to, were never the same. They spoke of voices behind silence, of glyphs that revealed themselves in dreams, of a presence that seemed to observe the reader more than be read. Fearing its misuse, the Templars classified the scroll as beyond relic, beyond artifact. It was living instruction, a thing not to be worshipped, but protected. Some believe it held the original names of the divine, not the names used in liturgy, but those used in creation. Names that could call down light or shatter cities. The Templars never revealed its existence to the Church. To do so would be to place it in the hands of men who had proven, time and again, their thirst for dominion over understanding. Instead, they sealed it within a reliquary, embedded in stone, deep in a chamber known only by encoded references in Templar architecture. The scroll, by its very essence, could not be destroyed, only hidden. It is said that the red cross itself contains a reference to its geometric ratio, and that certain stained glass windows in Templar churches, when viewed under solstice light, reveal fragments of its calligraphy. If the relic of the word still exists, it is the single most guarded secret in Templar history. Its purpose was not to teach, but to remind humanity that the true origin is not myth or metaphor, but vibration. And those who hold the frequency of the scroll in their hearts may find, within its silence, the power not to control creation, but to understand it. For the word was not lost. It was hidden within us all. Deep beneath the solemn chants and noble vows that marked the outer ceremonies of the Templar order, there existed a rite, spoken of only in fragmented whispers, passed through symbols, gestures, and silence. Known as the ritual of the Third Veil, it was not part of the public knighthood ceremonies held in great halls or watched by nobles. It was reserved for the few, the marked, the ones who had been selected by the inner circle to receive a transmission of power so old it predated the temple in Jerusalem itself. The ritual was said to recreate, in precise form, the sacred rites once conducted by Solomon's priesthood within the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum where no sound was allowed and only the high priest could enter, not to speak, but to listen. The Templars, through their excavations and their contact with Jewish mystics and Eastern adepts, reconstructed the ritual with astonishing detail. It began not with oaths, but with fasting, silence, and isolation. The initiate, stripped of title and identity, would descend alone into a chamber built beneath a commandery aligned to a celestial node, its floor carved with sacred geometry, echoing the dimensions of the original inner temple. The three veils represented three illusions that separated man from truth: the veil of time, the veil of identity, and the veil of perception. Passing through each meant enduring a symbolic death. First, the initiate would be shown a mirror, not of glass, but of black stone, reflecting not the face, but the fears, the past lives, and the karmic echoes. Then, he would walk between two pillars of fire and water, forced to recite the sacred names discovered beneath the Temple Mount, names never spoken in public. Finally, he would enter the chamber of breath, where the scrolls of vibration were chanted by a circle of veiled masters, each tone designed to alter the initiate's frequency, breaking the final illusion of separation. At the end of the ritual, the initiate was no longer a knight. He was a guardian, a living vessel of the inner teachings of Solomon. He would carry no mark, no title, but would walk the world with the understanding that all temples are within, that light and shadow are brothers, and that the divine speaks not through thunder, but silence. Few ever knew who had passed the third veil, for those who did were bound by silence deeper than any oath. But clues were left behind: carvings of three concentric circles, a triangle with a veiled eye, or the rare depiction of Solomon not with a crown, but a finger raised to his lips. The ritual of the third veil was not a ceremony. It was a passage, and for the Templars who emerged from it, there was no going back. They became the keepers of the flame, not to ignite the world, but to ensure it never went out. Among the countless records lost to time and fire, there is one voice that flickers in the margins of Templar history, like a ghost, a Cistercian monk whose name has been scrubbed from official chronologies, remembered only by the title given to him in veiled texts: the one who spoke. He had been sent by a prominent abbot, under orders laced with Vatican suspicion, to observe the Templars stationed in a remote fortress, nestled in the Pyrenees. For months he lived among them, cloaked in humility, recording their daily routines and sacred liturgies in the plain Latin expected of his station. But what he found there defied everything he had been taught. At night, beyond the candlelit prayers and military drills, he witnessed gatherings that were not Christian by any measure he had ever known. Rituals conducted in subterranean halls, shaped like ancient sigils. Songs sung in tongues long thought dead. Circles formed not around crucifixes, but geometric stones that glowed under moonlight. At the center of it all stood a relic unlike any he had read about, a crystal sphere suspended in a lattice of gold threads, responding to sound with pulses of light. The monk, driven by fear and a desperate need to reconcile what he had seen with the dogma he had sworn to defend, began to write. Not a report, but a manuscript he titled Contra Illusio, meaning against the illusion. In it, he described not only the ceremonies, but the philosophy he overheard in hushed exchanges between high-ranking knights. They spoke of divine resonance, of human bodies as temples of frequency, of Christ not as a lone figure, but as a reawakening of an older truth hidden since Solomon. The manuscript's final pages warned that the Templars were not heretics in the traditional sense, but something far more threatening to the Church, a living conduit of knowledge that bypassed hierarchy, confession, and even scripture. When he returned to his monastery, he begged his superiors to read his findings. Instead, he was imprisoned, declared insane, and his manuscript ordered to be burned. But not all of it was lost. Before his arrest, the monk had torn several pages from the middle of the text and passed them to a fellow scribe in secret. These pages surfaced centuries later in the private collection of an Austrian archduke, and later made their way into the hidden archives of the Rosicrucians. The fragments describe a ceremony referred to as the anointment of silence, where the initiate drinks from a cup inscribed not with Latin, but with inverted Hebrew. The ritual ends with a phrase, repeated 3 times, "Let the light be veiled." Today, scholars dismiss these pages as forgeries or Gnostic fables. But within Templar circles, the monk who betrayed is remembered not as a traitor, but as a catalyst. For it is said that truth, once spoken, cannot be unheard. Even when buried in ash, it waits, and the monk's words, fragmented and fragile, continue to echo beneath the surface of the story the Church tried to erase. While the world remembers the Knights Templar as a brotherhood of swordsmen, bound by chivalric vows and hidden knowledge, the true transmission of their most guarded secrets did not lie solely in the hands of armored men. Unseen and uncelebrated, there existed another lineage, equally sacred and far more elusive, the Daughters of the Order. Their names were never etched into stone, nor recorded in papal decrees, but they moved through the shadows of the Order with purpose and precision. These women were not warriors in the traditional sense, but guardians of memory, stewards of the divine balance, and carriers of wisdom too delicate to entrust to public rituals. Recruited from noble bloodlines and mystic traditions, they were trained in silence, mathematics, celestial cycles, and the language of symbols. Some came from Sufi households, others from forgotten Jewish sects who had preserved the feminine thread of Solomon's teachings. They were embedded within noble courts as healers, scribes, and midwives, each holding fragments of the Templar code, dispersed intentionally to ensure no single path led to the whole truth. When the knights rode to war, these women stayed behind, keeping the libraries hidden beneath monasteries and encoded within tapestries, icons, and stained glass. They carried the scrolls when borders shifted and kings turned hostile. They disguised rituals as lullabies, embedded maps into embroidery, and passed prophecies as fairy tales. In the hills of Provence, whispers tell of a convent where no prayers were uttered, only sacred tones sung at sunrise, mirroring the chants once heard beneath Solomon's temple. In Venice, a ledger uncovered in a merchant archive revealed transactions made by a woman known only by the sigil of the crescent star, acquiring rare inks and ancient papyri, believed to be copies of the scrolls lost in the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Even Rosslyn Chapel, often tied to the masculine mysteries of the Templars, bears carvings of feminine figures not explained by Christian doctrine, figures holding keys, stars, and scrolls close to their hearts. These were not artistic flourishes. They were signatures. The daughters of the order preserved the harmony the knights protected with steel. They were the balance to the blade, the stillness to the charge. And when the order fell under papal condemnation, when inquisitors burned libraries and interrogated knights under the weight of false confessions, it was the women who ensured the soul of the order survived. They fled to forests, joined underground mystery schools, and reappeared under new names: Beguines, Cathars, Sibyls. To this day, legends speak of a lineage still alive, a thread unbroken, waiting for the right moment to rise, not in war, but in remembrance. For the true order of Solomon was never meant to be preserved by strength alone. It was meant to be remembered in wholeness, where the sword meets the scroll, and the sacred feminine, long veiled, steps forward into the light. On a fateful Friday, the 13th, though the date is never openly recorded, the fear it inspired in history is unmistakable. The Church unleashed its purge of the Templars, ostensibly accusing them of heresy, corruption, and blasphemy. Yet beneath the show trials and the seizures of wealth lay a far deeper terror. The Church feared what the order guarded beneath the Temple Mount. The knights, with their hidden knowledge, sacred geometry, lost rituals, and possible bloodline relics, represented a threat not of armies but of truth. It was not the treasure that scared them the most. Gold can be taken, but knowledge, once revealed, cannot be easily contained. The Templars, masters of secret architecture, ancient initiation rites, and hidden scrolls, had become custodians of a legacy older than Rome itself. The Church's convenient accusations of idolatry and devil worship disguised something far more urgent. Those behind the Inquisition dared not confront what lay beneath the foundation of Christianity: the scrolls, the vaults, the covenant older than popes. On that night, commanderies were surrounded, libraries were torched, and knights dragged to dungeons, where confessions were forced through pain and fear, not truth. Yet even as fires consumed manuscripts and ink burned away centuries of coded devotion, the inner circle moved silently. The daughters of the order smuggled relics hidden in tapestries, while inner guardians carried fragments beneath their robes into woods, mountain retreats, and distant monastic shadows. The Council of Shadows had prepared for this. The relics, scrolls, and the supposed bloodline were dispersed. Some went north, to Rosslyn, others east, through Iberia into Sufi mystic lines. Still others embedded in stained glass and Gothic tracery that seemed decorative, but were in truth elaborate mnemonics awaiting rediscovery. The massacre of knights was not just an act of power, it was an act of suppression, aimed at silencing not blade-wielding soldiers, but torchbearers of forbidden wisdom. The Church sought to erase the architecture of memory, but knowledge slips through cracks. As the Inquisition marched, the sacred geometries of Chartres and the cryptic diagrams of the Scroll of Fire remained. The Black Madonna statues survived. The initiation symbols, sung in silence, endured, passed through generations of hidden women and renegade masons. And though the order was officially erased, the covenant they guarded survived in fragments of story, in the uncanny alignments of stone, in the bloodlines whispered of in secrecy. The fire of Friday the 13th did not extinguish Solomon's legacy. It scattered the embers. And embers can reignite, not in blaze, but in remembrance. As the fires of persecution scorched Europe and the banners of the once feared Templar order were torn down, a silence fell over the land. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of retreat, precision, and concealment. The world watched as knights were arrested, tortured, and forced to confess to lies. But the real guardians of Solomon's secret had already vanished, moving not as an army, but as shadows slipping through forgotten roads and sacred paths known only to the initiated. Some fled to Scotland, where the Rosslyn Chapel and surrounding lands welcomed them with symbols carved in stone and protection offered in silence. Others crossed into Iberia, where the Reconquista had fractured old borders, creating new safe havens in the kingdoms of Aragon and Portugal. There, under new names and new emblems, they rebuilt their cells as merchant guilds, naval orders, and quiet architects. But the core, the inner brotherhood, the guardians of the covenant, the keepers of the third veil, did not stop in Europe. Guided by prophecies known only to the Council of Shadows, they moved toward places untouched by Rome's hand. Some say they followed the Phoenician sea charts held in secret since the time of Solomon, voyaging west toward lands spoken of in whispers, long before Columbus claimed discovery. Others traveled south, deep into the sands of Africa, retracing the paths of ancient mystics who had once studied beneath the temple. And in the east, there are tales of Templars who arrived in the Levant, not as crusaders, but as seekers, blending with Sufi orders and Essene remnants, their armor exchanged for robes, their swords for scrolls. They did not scatter in fear. They dispersed with intention, each small group carrying a fragment of the whole, a relic, a scroll, a code, a lineage. The covenant had been divided, not broken. Wherever they went, they built in symbols, temples disguised as churches, doorways with Solomonic stars, murals where geometry whispered the language of the divine. And always there was the circle representing the cycle of return, the knowledge that what is hidden will one day be found again. The church declared them extinct. Monarchs rewrote them as traitors or myth. But the hidden exodus was neither end nor escape. It was preservation, a migration of memory. The knowledge of Solomon, once stored beneath the temple, now walked with men and women across continents. And though history would forget their names, the descendants of those who vanished would carry the frequency of the covenant in their bones. In sacred sites aligned with stars, in stories that outlived books, in bloodlines that would someday awaken, the hidden exodus was not disappearance. It was transformation. The guardians had not died. They had become legend. And legend, when remembered, becomes prophecy. The legend of the Holy Grail, so captivating in its mystery and so persistent in its retelling, was never meant to be the center of the story. It was crafted as a veil, a poetic distraction from a far older and more potent truth. While poets and troubadours of the medieval courts sang of knights on eternal quests for a sacred chalice, the true Templar legacy was not about a cup that once held the blood of Christ. The real relic was not made of gold or glass, but of knowledge carved into stone, embedded in architecture, geometry, and encoded language. The Grail myth, with its emotional pull and universal appeal, became the perfect decoy, a symbol easy to romanticize and safe enough for church approval. But within the inner circles of the order, it was understood that the Grail referred to something far more abstract and dangerous. It symbolized a transmission of divine frequency, a secret of sacred design that had nothing to do with relics and everything to do with resurrection, not of a person, but of consciousness. It was never about drinking from a vessel, but about becoming the vessel. What was buried beneath Solomon's temple was not a cup, but a codex-etched stone slabs, ancient instruments, and possibly the remnants of a civilization whose understanding of the universe dwarfed even modern science. These were tools of alignment, capable of harmonizing space, time, and thought. But to protect them, the Templars allowed the world to chase myths. By the time the stories of Arthur, Percival, and the Fisher King spread across Europe, the real guardians had already ensured the ancient knowledge had been distributed, encrypted in Gothic cathedrals, encoded into the dimensions of hidden vaults, and woven into the rites of secret societies. Every chapel with impossible acoustics, every window tracing constellations, every labyrinth with hidden center points, these were fragments of the real Grail. And while kings and treasure hunters wasted lifetimes searching for golden cups and enchanted springs, the truth lay in plain sight, misunderstood, and dismissed. The myth of the Grail succeeded because it was safer to believe in fairy tales than to confront the idea that humanity's history is older, deeper, and more deliberately erased than we dare admit. The Church tolerated the Grail legend because it distracted from what the Templars had truly guarded: the covenant of consciousness, encoded in Solomon's legacy. The Red Cross was not a symbol of sacrifice. It was a map. The Grail was not the beginning. It was the cover story. And even now, as new generations search for meaning in ancient ruins and symbols etched in weathered stone, the real secret remains, humming quietly through frequencies we've forgotten how to hear. The Grail was never meant to be found. It was meant to be remembered. While the world believed the Templars had vanished into ash and memory, their essence was quietly reborn beneath a different name and in a different land. In Portugal, under the rule of King Dinis, the remnants of the order found sanctuary and a sovereign willing to shield them from the papal blade. And so, with a quiet decree, the Templars became the Order of Christ, a name that satisfied the Church, but a mission that remained unchanged. Their red cross endured, now emblazoned on sails that would soon carry them into uncharted oceans, not in pursuit of conquest, but to protect and scatter the fragments of a legacy they still guarded. This transformation was not mere survival, it was strategy. With new titles, new vows, and a royal charter, the Guardians of Solomon's Secret moved into a new age, one of navigation, exploration, and coded preservation. The Order of Christ became the invisible architects behind Portugal's Age of Discovery, embedding symbols and sacred geometry in the very ships that charted the edges of the known world. Their knowledge of astronomy, refined through ancient Hebrew texts and preserved Sufi cosmology, made them masters of navigation. But what they sought was not gold or glory. They sought places unspoiled by Rome, untouched by inquisitions, where the covenant of Solomon could sleep undisturbed. The famed explorers, such as Henry the Navigator, were not merely royal visionaries. They were initiated stewards of the deeper mission, trained not only in maritime skill, but in esoteric rites whispered down from the original nine. In their voyages, the order seeded encrypted symbols into colonial architecture, built chapels that aligned with celestial patterns, and ensured the continuation of the Solomonic blueprint across oceans. This was no accident. It was rebirth. And Portugal, small though it seemed on the European stage, became the new heartbeat of a silent order. Lisbon and Tomar stood as its lungs, breathing the old wisdom through new masks. Even the maps they commissioned held hidden layers, as longitude lines followed not just the Earth, but energy pathways known only to those initiated. The rebirth of the Templars as the Order of Christ did not abandon their ancient duty, it extended it. From the tombs of Jerusalem to the towers of Lisbon, the Red Cross continued its watch, guarding not just relics, but truths too profound to be trusted to empires. Solomon's legacy was no longer buried. It now sailed the seas, encoded in sails, in stone and in blood. And while the Church may have celebrated the Templars' demise, it never realized the order had only shed its skin. For true power does not need to be seen to survive. It needs only to endure. And in Portugal, it endured. Quietly, eternally. Long before modern science uncovered magnetic anomalies and ley lines, the Templars possessed something far more precise. Maps not of political borders or trade routes, but of energy. These maps of light, hidden deep within Templar commanderies, were sacred documents revealing a forgotten layer of the world. They charted not rivers or mountains, but currents of invisible power flowing through the earth, the very lifeblood of the planet, recognized by ancient mystics and encoded into sacred geography since the days of Solomon. Unlike any conventional map, these scrolls were layered in codes and geometry, demanding a trained eye and initiated mind to read them. They marked nodes where cathedrals now stood, intersections where miracles were reported, and convergence points where ritual would amplify intention. And always, these maps centered not on cities, but on silence, remote hills, monolithic stones and valleys where the resonance of creation had never been disturbed. The Templars had not discovered these lines. They had inherited them. From the Essenes, from Egyptian priesthoods, from Sufi astronomers and Hebrew scholars, all of whom had protected the knowledge of the grid that underpins our reality. These lines, which the Templars referred to as threads of divine accord, connected sacred sites across Europe, from the crypts of Rosslyn to the altar of Chartres, from Montserrat to Tomar, and even beyond to the distant shores reached during the Age of Discovery. The knights built not where it was convenient, but where the lines demanded. Commanderies, temples, even simple chapels were constructed with obsessive precision, not only aligning with celestial events but resonating with the frequencies of the earth itself. They understood that knowledge without anchoring was volatile, and so they encoded their maps in stone, through spiral staircases, sacred ratios, and the geometry of rose windows. But only a select few within the order ever saw the complete maps of light. Most Templars served without understanding the full scope of their mission. Only those inducted through the highest veil of initiation were granted access to the full codex, often in fragments, passed from master to master, accompanied by an oath that surpassed death itself. These maps were not intended for navigation alone. They were keys to activation, meant to be used during specific celestial alignments when the veil between matter and spirit thinned. The Church, unaware of the map's existence, dismissed their strategic placements as coincidence or superstition. But those who knew the truth understood that these sites formed a living circuit, a continent-wide altar designed to harmonize human consciousness with the divine blueprint. Even today, those who trace the paths laid out in the maps of light speak of synchronicities, visions, and awakenings. For though the paper has yellowed and the scrolls have faded, the lines remain, waiting. And those who find them, whether through intuition or inheritance, do not just rediscover ancient geography. They step into an ancient current where history and prophecy are one and the same. For centuries, whispers have circulated through hidden corridors of power that not all within the Vatican serve the same purpose. Among the countless archivists, theologians, and cardinals, There are said to be those whose duty is not to interpret Scripture, but to intercept it. Known only in cryptic references as the Custodes Umbrae or the Keepers of Shadow. These individuals are believed to be the silent watchers, tasked with suppressing any resurgence of Templar Solomonic knowledge. Unlike inquisitors or clerical enforcers, these watchers do not operate through fire and public accusation. They operate through redacted manuscripts, vanished relics, sealed libraries, and discredited scholars. Their power lies not in confrontation, but in containment. Deep within the Vatican's secret archives, far from the gaze of the faithful, are vaults without labels, filled with scrolls wrapped in strange fabrics, symbols etched in languages older than Latin, and books that hum with a kind of presence. It is here, many believe, that the Vatican holds what it dares. Not destroy, but cannot allow to surface maps of the Temple Mount, fragments of the Scroll of Fire, and letters exchanged between Templar masters and mystics, whose names were never written into church history. The Watchers know the truth. They know the Templars never died, that Solomon's covenant was never broken, only hidden. They know the architectural patterns embedded in cathedrals were not decorative, but operative. They understand the geometry of power and how the order's knowledge, if unleashed, could reshape doctrine itself. And so, they remain vigilant, not against heresy in the streets, but against memory in the stones. When researchers stumble too close to the truth, they are quietly redirected, their grants revoked, their reputations tarnished. If a relic surfaces, it is purchased before it reaches auction, or mysteriously disappears in transit. Occasionally, a whistleblower emerges, claiming to have seen something: a coded map, a Templar relic, a scroll bearing the names of the Nine. These voices are dismissed as fringe, discredited with surgical precision, never silenced with violence, only erased by doubt. The Watchers are patient, for they believe time is their ally. But time, as the Templars understood, is not linear. Every few generations, the knowledge resurfaces, and the cycle begins again. What the Vatican fears is not rebellion, but revelation. Not that people will stop believing, but that they will believe differently. That they will see beyond the cross into the code, beyond the chalice into the stone, and beyond the church into the covenant. The eyes in the Vatican watch not only for those who remember, but for those who awaken. For once awakened, a mind cannot be unlit. And so the Watchers wait, guarding secrets they dare not speak aloud, knowing the silence is thinning. Knowing that the truth does not sleep, and the guardians of the order never stopped walking beneath the world. In the heart of Vatican City, behind reinforced stone and guarded doors, there exists an archive spoken of only in hushed tones, a chamber so secret it does not appear in official records, floor plans, or digital registries. This room, known among certain initiates as the Silentum Vault, is said to contain the most dangerous documents ever brought into the Vatican. These are not heretical gospels or ancient philosophical scrolls. They are relics of the Templars, unearthed beneath Solomon's temple, believed by some to contain original writings predating even the Pentateuch, bearing the seal of ancient priesthoods and revealing truths that would shake the foundations of three major religions. The vault, sealed by papal decree during the waning days of the Templar trials, was never meant to be opened. Not for historians. Not even for future popes. Inside, it is whispered, are scrolls inscribed on copper and leather, codices wrapped in ancient linens, and a single stone tablet, etched with geometric patterns that do not match any known tradition. Those who have attempted to request access are met not with denial, but with silence. Even among the Vatican's most elite scholars, knowledge of this archive is fragmented, often passed in riddles, never confirmed. Its very existence is a paradox, no official acknowledgement, yet constant internal vigilance. Rumors persist of cardinals who attempted to breach the vault's outer seal, only to be reassigned or disappear from the public eye. Why such secrecy? Because the contents do not merely challenge doctrine. They offer a blueprint for a different understanding of divinity itself. Within those ancient scrolls, if they do exist, lies a cosmology where man is not fallen, but forgotten, where the divine spark is not granted, but inherited. These texts, allegedly found by the original 9 Templars, were not stored in libraries, but in the depths of the earth, shielded by time and preserved in ritual. Their language, a fusion of Hebrew, Proto-Aramaic, and an unknown symbolic script, remains undeciphered by modern linguistics. Only those who undergo certain initiations are said to perceive its meaning. The archive remains locked not because of danger to the body, but to the structure of belief. For if the world were to learn that the foundation of its spiritual traditions rests on fragments older than Scripture, guarded by an order condemned as heretics, it would fracture not only faith, but the very systems that rely on it. The Templars did not lose these scrolls. They delivered them, and the Church, in a move both cautious and cunning, hid them where only the initiated would ever know to look, in silence, in shadow, and in stone. The archive that never opens is more than a room. It is a decision, a line drawn not in ink, but in secrecy. And until the key is turned, the question remains: what truth lies waiting just beyond the lock? It was never just about the past. From the shattered stones beneath Jerusalem to the hidden chambers beneath European cathedrals, the trail of the Templars does not end in flame or silence. It continues, woven into myths, encrypted into geometry, and whispered in symbols carved into forgotten walls. The Order of Solomon did not vanish. It simply changed its face, shedding armor for anonymity, leaving behind swords to embrace knowledge. In each age, the legacy returns not as an institution, but as a vibration, an awakening that stirs among artists, mystics, scholars, and seekers. You see it in the symbols woven into Renaissance paintings, in the cathedrals that align perfectly with the stars, in the architecture of Freemasons who built not for wealth but to preserve a message. Rituals thought extinct quietly persist, practiced in enclaves, shielded from modern eyes. And some even whisper that the bloodline still breathes, moving through the veins of the unknowing, preserved not through titles or crowns, but through sacred covenants passed in secret. The essence of Solomon's wisdom, his command over spirit and stone, his communion with forces beyond dogma, was not buried with his bones, nor erased by the fall of temples. It was safeguarded, entrusted to those who understood that power without purpose is corruption, and truth without secrecy becomes blasphemy. The order remains hidden not out of fear, but out of necessity. For in a world ruled by appearances, real truth is best guarded behind symbols, cloaked in stories, and protected by time. They do not seek control. They seek remembrance. And in certain moments of history, when the world teeters too close to forgetting, echoes of the order rise again. A manuscript discovered in the sands, a cathedral revealing its star map, a bloodline tracing itself back not to royalty, but to an ancient pact sealed under Solomon's gaze. This is not fiction. It is history's shadow. The Order of Solomon does not rally under banners anymore, but its flame still burns. It flickers in questions left unanswered, in rituals quietly repeated, in archives that remain locked. Perhaps that is the truest form of immortality. Not survival through force, but through mystery. The Templars may be gone. The Church may deny. The scholars may argue, but the symbols endure. The geometry remains. The bloodline pulses. And so the legacy lives on, not waiting for discovery, but for remembrance. Because Solomon's secret was never just what he built, but what he understood. That knowledge, when sacred, must be hidden in plain sight, waiting patiently for those with eyes to see and hearts to hear, in silence, in shadow, and always in stone.